Good afternoon. This is Henry Keane on UATV channel explaining complex things in simple terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, has suggested dealing with Russian traitors according to wartime rules with the help of silent groups.
The debate over how to deal with traitors who have defected to the enemy and wish death on their motherlands has resumed there, on the internet and on Telegram. In particular, there are some useless pieces of shit who until recently considered themselves to be so-called intellectual elite. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, on Telegram.
Some parliamentarians of the State Duma of the Russian Federation have suggested coming up with a set of restrictive measures for people who criticize the war against Ukraine, the so-called special military operation, and who have left Russia, in particular depriving them of Russian citizenship or banning them from entering the Russian Federation for 20 years. Questions? Yes, actually, a couple of them. Where are your children, Mr. Medvedev? Your Tsar's daughters are sisters of mercy on the front line, aren't they? Prigozhin's children? The children of Russian parliament deputies, are they all on the front line these days? I suppose they are, since they are offspring of naughty fascist scoundrel murderers and thieves, but truly patriotic Russians like, for example, CEO of Chechnya Ramzan Kadyrov. And if they are on the front line, how come they are constantly spotted in Nice, Paris, Antwerp, London, New York and Berlin, buying Italian clothes, driving German cars, talking on American phones, hiding their billions of dollars and euros in European and American banks? Well, let me show you something, Mr. Medvedev. I filmed this in Kharkiv. This is your full namesake, Mr. Medvedev, Dmitry Medvedev, born at the date that you see. He was 3 months old back then. A piece of shrapnel from the missile you have launched, Mr. Medvedev, has pierced his little body through and killed his mum. When I was filming this, little Dmitry Medvedev's granny was warming up a bottle of milk from the fridge. It was the last bottle of mother's milk left of her daughter, little Dmitry Medvedev's mother from Kharkiv, who was killed by you, Mr. Medvedev, from Moscow. You call the useless pieces of shit those of Russian intellectual elite that in fear and disgust are now living Russia, calling this war what it is, a criminal aggression of an outdated Soviet empire towards Ukraine. Yet, in self-contradiction to yourself, you want your silent killers to hunt those useless pieces of shit down and murder them, just as you murdered your Kharkiv's 3-month-old namesake Dmitry Medvedev's mother. It is a natural behavior of a Russian oligarch that calls itself elite, but is nothing more than a natural-born murderer, thief, and a political scoundrel, ready to cast venomous propagandistic horrors of war onto the whole Europe while hiding his own family and wealth in the very same Europe. I wonder, Mr. Medvedev, when you and your master Putin happen to see the corpses of your children in those mass graves in Bucha and Irpin, what would you say? Something patriotic, I believe. But we both know it will never happen, right? Your children are safe. And Russia, you just don't care much about Russia, do you?
And we, the victims of aggression, as martyrs, will go to heaven, while they will just die, because they will not even have time to repent.
Well, of course, Putin wants to punish those Russians against the war. Putin wants to punish the whole world, for it have finally seen him as he really is, the naked king, embittered, cruel, hating, denying the facts if he does not like them, therefore losing battle after battle on the battlefield, on the political arena, the battle of his country's future even. But is this really his country? Is Putin Russian? Or rather Soviet, just like his outdated and beloved empire. And he wants to turn to Stalin repressions and concentration camps to make all those daring to stand out, to vanish in the hellfire of Soviet patriotic righteousness. Well, what's next? Russia has already raised the military conscript age, and now those from 20 to 30 years old will give their lives in Putin's private army for the cause that you, Mr. Medvedev, call a patriotism. Well, me and Samuel Johnson, the celebrated British man of letters, both think that patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. That famous line by Samuel Johnson is not in contrary to what is widely believed about patriotism in general, but rather what Johnson saw as the false use of the term. When someone in political charge of the country abuses the very sense of the term patriotism, that should be all about living and thriving in your own country and not dying and killing in an attempt to conquer a foreign one. What Russia produces for the world but enormous pompous oligarch yachts, mind-boggling stolen riches, and an image of a brutal savage with a promise of a nuclear devastation on its skewed by pseudo-patriotic propaganda face. Anything for peace? Any technology that the world needs for living? I want to show you something, dear world. A Russian scientific breakthrough in breathing underwater. Well, Russians may call it whatever they like, but I call it animal abuse. I'm speechless. Anyway, it is a breakthrough in a sort. Dogs breathing underwater happen to be in human history only twice. Some sort of a science fiction movie of 1989 and in the Russian Modern Science Development Center Skolkovo under Rogozhin's patronage. I remind you, Mr. Rogozhin is a former head of Roscosmos, Russian space agency. But he's not just a Russian scientist and politician, he is a warrior too. The former head of the Russian space agency was hit in the buttocks by a French howitzer at his birthday party. The piece of a shrapnel removed from his ass, Rogozhin then have sent to French President Emmanuel Macron. I mean, Russian officials often imply that it is very funny how our president is a former comedian. Well, indeed he is. But if you really want to make the world laugh, there are simply no better candidates than Russian officials themselves. Putin has removed Russia's top commander in Ukraine just 3 months after he was installed. Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov will now lead Putin's criminal warfare. General Surovikin, now Gerasimov's deputy, has been dubbed General Armageddon for his brutal tactics in previous wars, including Russia's operations in Syria in general and the heavy bombardment of the city of Aleppo in particular, shortly after he was appointed to lead Putin's criminal warfare against Ukraine in October. Russia began its campaign to destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure, leaving millions of Ukrainian civilians without power or running water for extended periods in the depth of winter. Russia's defense ministry said the decision to replace General Surovikin was aimed at organizing closer contact between different branches of the armed forces and improving the quality and effectiveness of the management of Russian forces. But the move has been seen by some as a sign that he just may have gained too much power.
I don't think this is because Surovikin is viewed as a failure. Certainly possible that this was driven by political reasons. As a unified commander in Ukraine, Surovikin was becoming very powerful and was likely bypassing Shoigu Gerasimov when talking to Putin. Rob Lee, military analyst on Twitter.
Power. That is, and always was, only legit currency of Russian war elites. And there are simply no other elites in Russia. Also, worth mentioning, the reshuffle comes as Russians claim they are making progress in eastern Ukraine after suffering a series of military defeats in recent months. But Wednesday's announcement comes as fighting continues in Soledar. The fall of Soledar may help Russian troops in their assault on the strategic city of Bakhmut, about 6 miles to the southwest, providing them with a secure artillery position within range of the city. Soledar also has deep salt mines, which could be used to station troops and store equipment protected from Ukrainian missiles. Russia's mercenary Wagner Group has taken full credit for storming it. Yevgeny Prigozhin said his forces were in full control of Soledar. However, on Wednesday morning, the Russian Defense Ministry released a statement appearing to contradict his claim. This has in turn led to Prigozhin's repeating the claim on Wednesday evening. The apparent differences in Russia's official narrative surrounding the latest events around Soledar hint at divisions in the country's military leadership, particularly between the Wagner Group and the Defense Ministry. Told you, power. There's more than one front line for criminal Ukrainian war, and the actual battlefield is not only one. The other is the Kremlin and its under-the-carpet, shoulder-straps Star Wars. For his part, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky denied that Soledar had fallen.
Зараз держава-терориста і
Now, the terrorist state and its propagandists are trying to pretend that some part of our city of Soledar, a city that was almost completely destroyed by the occupiers, is allegedly some kind of Russia achievement. They will present, and are already presenting, this to their society in such a way as to support mobilization and to give hope to those who support aggression.
Well, one thing is obvious. The shuffle is on and Surovikin is going off it. On behalf of Ukraine, we want to thank General Surovikin for doing a great job for our country. In only 3 months of his brutal attacks on Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, we have had a lot of military aid from around the world, from Leopard tanks to Patriot missiles. Also, General Armageddon should be thanked for returning Kherson to where it belongs, back to Ukraine. We much appreciate that. General Gerasimov now replaces Sergei Surovikin, and what's to expect? Well, General Gerasimov, who has been in post since 2012, is the longest-serving Russian chief of general staff of the post-Soviet era. Gerasimov is a serious opponent, says someone trustworthy.
I grew up on Russian military doctrine and still believe that all military science is in Russia. I studied from Gerasimov. I read everything he ever wrote. He's an intelligent man, and my expectations for him were enormous. Valery Zaluzhny, the commander-in-chief of the Armored Force of Ukraine, in an interview with Time.
But the thing is, it just does not matter how talented Russian military man or scientist or artist is, it's just Russian, and that means as soon as he will impose any threat to the Kremlin's power, he's out. We in Ukraine never underestimate our enemies. And we put all of our hope and beliefs in that Valery Zaluzhny has read General Gerasimov's books well, and that the time has come for the student to surpass his teacher, and will rewrite all his military books for the victorious grand finale of Ukraine. In recent days, there have been competing claims over who has control over the town amid fierce fighting. As we mentioned already, Wagner, the Russian private military company, just by the way, private military companies that hire mercenaries are prohibited by Russian law, but who cares about the law when you have Putin, right? So, private military company Wagner said it had taken complete control of Soledar on Tuesday. The claim was refuted by Ukraine. The Strategic Communication Department of the Armed Forces of Ukraine called this information a Russian Information and Psychological Operation, IPSO.
It seems that Prigozhin's location is not accurate and he is not in Soledar mines, an item of IPSO from Prigozhin's PR people, which is aimed at a domestic audience in order to somehow justify the huge losses amongst convicts. Statement of the Strategic Communication Department of the Armored Forces of Ukraine.
So, what is the actual tactical situation in Soledar? Let me today run a bit ahead of the usual explanations on UATV. Strategically, the war of the Russian Federation in Ukraine has already been lost. All the initial goals of the aggressor turned out to be unattainable. Future stagnation, regression, and a civil war maybe awaits Russia. As long as the Putin regime retains the ability to concentrate human resources for aggression and retain the loyalty of subordinates, the situation on the battlefield will remain difficult for Ukraine. The enemy's tactical successes in Soledar, however, do not mean that the Russians have seized the strategic initiative. The main battles of this war are yet to come. From a military point of view, the Russian command is acting irrationally, wasting huge resources on secondary goals. All this has only political significance and is connected with propaganda and the internal struggle for, yes, the struggle for power between political factions of the Kremlin. Despite the general mobilization underway in Russia, its army is weak. Well-trained personnel units, parks of modern military equipment were irretrievably lost, and a shortage of ammunition began. The main task of the defense forces at this stage is to exhaust and wear down the enemy. And there is one thing we assure you, dear world: all lost positions will definitely be taken back. It was Henry Keane on UATV channel explaining quite complex things in quite simple terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Stay safe and tuned for more.